Hey all, Alex here at your home of the Music Deep Dive, and today it is time for part number 13 of the Record Collection Tour. Thanks to everybody for bearing with the lack of uploads in recent weeks. I was actually out of state on vacation, but now that I've come back and am significantly poorer because of it, we'll be back hopefully to making more regular videos again. Thankfully, I did satiate at least some of you with the consistent record collection updates. And this time promises to be no different. As I promised in the last video, this is an Elton John extravaganza. And it's such a big extravaganza that I have one stack of records here and one stack of records behind me. Because the truth is that I am virtually complete on Elton John records. There is some stuff that I don't have, which we will get to. I'll kind of explain the gaps in my collection. But for the most part, Elton John records either were released on vinyl pretty consistently at the time, or they benefited from reissues. So Elton actually in the last few years, I don't know, I'd say about 5 or so years, has reissued a lot of his albums on vinyl, including the ones that were never released on vinyl before, or were just simply very difficult to find. So that has helped me a lot. That has been a real boon in my journey. And yeah, so we're going to be talking about all of them. Last thing I'll plug before we start, I did a video on another YouTube channel called Music Meltdown where I discussed the complete Elton John discography for the better part of 3 hours. So if you want my really in-depth thoughts on each of these albums, go there. The one caveat, and which I will be addressing here, is that in that video, kind of the gimmick there was that it was a random order, so you never quite know what album I'm going to be talking about when, which made for some very interesting transitions, I must say. But this time it'll be completely chronological. You're going to get kind of my brief thoughts on each of the records that I possess, and we'll kind of go from there. So a little bit more straightforward, kind of systematic. So hope you get something out of this. But let's dive into it because there's a lot of fucking records here to talk about. So we start from the beginning, which is actually one of the Elton John records where I have multiple copies of it. This is Empty Sky from 1969. The reason I own 2 copies of it, and I'll show the other one here as well, is because I believe this is the American reissue from 75. So Empty Sky was released on a very, just hit the microphone there, sorry. It was released on kind of a more limited scale in 69, and I do believe that this is a first pressing, or at least close to it. Has the original artwork and everything, and even some of the kind of the promotional quotes on the back as well. And then obviously after Elton became an international superstar, people wanted to kind of revisit that first album. There was certainly the demand for it because he was, you know, one of the biggest artists in the world. So that's where this reissue comes from. I don't like this cover at all, if I'm being perfectly honest. I really don't. So gatefold's kind of cool though. Empty Sky is a record. It's a little bit precocious, I suppose, in the sense that it is a little bit like it does feel like he is growing as an artist. Some of that is hindsight talking, right? Because we know what would come afterwards. But it is still, I think, a pretty strong album overall. A lot of good tunes, interesting lyrics from Bernie Taupin. I have a lot of feelings about Taupin as a lyricist. I do tend to think that his lyrics can border on cringy a lot of the time. So I'm not always crazy about them, but it is what it is. And he does hit the mark a lot of the times. Like Skyline Pigeon on that record, I think, is one of his best lyrical moments. Self-titled record from 1970 with the half price book sticker still on it. Ton of ringwear on this copy, certainly not the best. Noticeable on the back as well. But this is a fantastic album. Really just a major leap in quality overall. And what I think is cool about it is it's a good balance. It's a healthy balance of strong, notable tracks. Everyone knows Your Song, and it is as good as people say it is. Everyone knows Border Song. Take Me to the Pilot is popular. But the album tracks too. First episode at High Intent, I think, is a beautiful song. Absolutely beautiful. And yeah, I mean, it is formative, and he gets better from there. But boy, it's a really strong way to start. We then go to a live album where the cover is split. I think the record is in okay condition. 11/17/70, so live performance from November of 1970. This is mostly, I shouldn't say that, it's about 50% tracks from the debut album. There's a couple of covers on here, and Burn Down the Mission from Tumbleweed Connection is on here as well. It's a good live album. I'm not like head over heels for any of Elton's live records. I would say Gun to My Head, that is probably the best one, because that is, like, he's at his rawest here, like his most kind of energetic. The band is kind of smaller, and I mean, they're kind of playing for their livelihoods still at this point, whereas on future live records, like Here and There, like he's the biggest fucking thing ever, you know, at that point, or certainly one of the biggest things going. So, yeah. In any case, Tumbleweed Connection, an album that it took a while for me, this one, to grow on me. Show the gatefold here as well. Jesus. I think it's the record sleeve that's kind of hidden in here, but this one took a while to grow on me. It's not one of my absolute favorite Elton John records, or it wasn't one of my favorite Elton John records for quite a while. And I don't know why. I don't know if it's just because the style wasn't really my thing. This isn't the side of Elton John that I'm normally drawn to, but it has grown on me quite a bit. And now I absolutely think it's one of his best, and one of my favorites. Just, I think the consistency and song quality, like there are other albums that match it, but none of them I think exceed it. Tumbleweed Connection is just a really strong bit of songwriting, and I think it's interesting how much of kind of a love letter it is to that Americana style of music. You know, Elton and Topin both are very critical of like some stereotypes in the South, and you see that come through in their songwriting, but they also clearly have a deep infatuation with it. It's a very interesting kind of dichotomy there. A lot of great songs on that one. Probably my favorite would be Talking Old Soldiers, though. The Friends soundtrack from 71. This is kind of gets forgotten about, in the sense that it's a soundtrack record. You know, it's debatable whether or not it's considered part of the Elton John canon. Some people do say it is, some people say it isn't. I would say that it is, and the only issue I have with it really is just that I think this is some of his most anonymous songwriting. Overall, title track is really good, but there's not a whole lot of standouts on it for me. It just it sort of exists, and it's very pleasant, but it would not rate anywhere near the top of my Elton discography. I have 2 copies of Madman Across the Water. This is the first one I got, and as you can see, it doesn't have a sleeve. It's just the record, although the record is in pretty damn good condition. So I did end up getting another copy with the sleeve. And actually, this one, I actually don't think the record is in super great condition, so I might just end up doing a swap, and then trading the other one in. There's the gatefold, not much to write home about in there. But Madman is an album that I struggle with a little bit. There are some moments in there that are as good as anything Elton John ever did, and then you have much of the second side of the record, which I find myself not really caring about too much, apart from Indian Sunset, which is a pretty epic song. Although I will say Indian Sunset, if you see that one live, I guess you can't anymore, but you watch performances of it live where Elton's just doing it with Ray Cooper. Phenomenal stuff. Just pitch perfect. Absolutely love it. Honky Chateau. Great album. Great album. I'm not crazy. This is kind of an interesting little design thing they do right here. And then that opens up the gatefold, which I'll try to show you here. Um, the interesting thing about Honky Chateau is I'm not crazy about two of the songs here, Salvation and Slave, but everything else I think is absolutely phenomenal. And if you replace those two songs with somewhat better songs, this either goes to the top of my Elton John rankings or comes very freaking close. There is so much of value here. It just kind of slows down in the middle a little bit, and so that drops it a peg or two for me. But damn, lot of really fantastic stuff. Honky Cat, Rocket Man, Amy is terrific. Mona Lisa's and Mad Hatters, of course. Don't Shoot Me, I'm Only the Piano Player. An album that I have underrated historically. Again, another gatefold, pretty interesting. This record, I think a lot of people actually underrate it because they kind of see it as like the shittier predecessor to Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. You know, it's a very aggressive word for it, but I think people generally would say that the songwriting is weaker. I'm not saying it isn't, but I think the difference in quality is actually a lot smaller than people say it is. I think this album sounds fantastic. The playing on it is out of this world. The Elton John band, like, you talk about Elton John as an artist, you have to talk about the Elton John band. Genuinely one of the best rock bands of the 1970s, no questions asked. And they're starting to lock themselves in on Honky Chateau because that's where they add Davy Johnston in, and that's when they become the Elton John band. But they are on fire here. And they're going to be on fire for the 3 records afterwards as well. They're just operating at a phenomenal level. So even if the songs are slighter for the most part, I mean, stuff like Teacher, I Need You, Midnight Creeper, Have Mercy on the Criminal is a ridiculously fantastic song. And I'm also very partial to the song Texan Love Song, which is really cool. Kind of a predecessor for Goodbye Yellow Brick, yes, the album Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. Texan Love Song I'm referring to is a predecessor for Roy Rogers on this album, which is one of my favorite songs on it. What's to say about Goodbye Yellow Brick Road? I did a collaboration on this album on the Williams Schmillions channel with Tom Williams. Highly recommend checking it out. There's a massive fucking gatefold here, which I'm going to assume most of you have seen because this is going to be a pain in the ass to show on camera. But yes, I did a collaboration with Tom Williams on Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. Highly recommend checking it out. I think it's a really cool discussion that we had about it. The TLDR, if you will, is that it's a phenomenal album, and it's one of the best double albums ever made. I think there's only maybe one song on here that I am not crazy about, but that one song, I mean, it's like saying I think the White Album is like merely really good because Revolution 9 exists. And this song is nowhere near as long as Revolution 9. I think, you know, double albums are going to be more susceptible to those weaker tracks. And even though Jamaica Jerk Off in this case is, to me, clearly the outlier, clearly the worst song on the record, doesn't bring anything else down because, I mean, that first side is like light years above so much of what was coming out at that point. And side 2, 3, and 4 are all really strong also. I mean, it's just a bunch of phenomenal songs, phenomenal performances, phenomenal songwriting. I already said Roy Rogers is my pick for most underrated song, but there's so much. I've seen that movie 2 is fantastic. I've had Social Disease grow on me a lot lately. Sweet Painted Lady, just a lot of the country stuff on the second side I think is really interesting and tends to get overlooked a bit. Caribou. This used to be bottom half Elton John for me because I was just really that kind of bothered by the songwriting. It's basically, I mean, it's Don't Shoot Me level songwriting, but even more trivial somehow, for the most part. And then you have obvious exceptions. Like, I would never call Ticking a trivial song when it's literally talking about gun violence. But again, the band uplifts even the weaker songs on this record. Like Solar Prestige Gammon is a stupid song, but the band really uplifted and really take it to this next level. Don't Let the Sun Go Down on Me and The Bitch Is Back are as good as people say they are. My pick for underrated song is I've Seen the Saucers. Fantastic vocal, fantastic band performance, super dynamic. They're really on fire there. And they exceed themselves again on this record, Captain Fantastic and the Brown Dirt Cowboy. There they are in all their glory. To me, this is Elton's best record. Not really because of the concept per se. You know, I think people have that association. Oh, it's Elton John's concept record, ergo it must be the best. That's not why. I think the band sounds better than they ever did here. They are firing on all cylinders. The first side to me is as good as Goodbye Yellow Brick Road's first side, or at least really close to it. Someone Saved My Life Tonight is my favorite Elton John song. And the second side is weaker, sure, but Gotta Get a Meal Ticket, the band performance on that. We All Fall in Love Sometimes and Curtains, just great songwriting to close the album out. Aside from the mess of an album cover, which I don't really know. I don't know. I'd have to really sit with it and focus on it more to really appreciate it, I'm sure. But it is kind of outed, I suppose you could say. But no, it's a phenomenal album. It's a phenomenal album, and to me, the peak of Elton John's powers. And while I don't think he falls off a cliff per se, not right away, it is a bit distressing to compare this to kind of the lows that would happen going forward. Rock of the Westies from 75 as well. It is a step down for sure. The band looks a little bit different nowadays. But they still sound good enough, and the songwriting for the most part is still good enough to kind of keep this from falling into complete mediocrity. I Feel Like a Bullet in the Gun of Robert Ford, to me, is possibly his most underrated song, because I think that chorus is just out of this world fantastic. One of his most underrated albums, Blue Moves from 76. I think the thing with Blue Moves is that it's another double album. There's the gatefold again. It's another double album, and certainly this one does not compare to Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, but I really like some of the ideas that he's trying for on this, like this really kind of, again, clear disco influence at points, although, you know, he gradually descends more into kind of that influence, which for Elton is not a good thing, but I do think it works here. I like One Horse Town. I like, and Bite Your Lip is kind of annoying. Crazy Water I like. And Boogie Pilgrim, I suppose, is interesting. But there's still a lot of highlights that go outside of it. Tonight, Cage the Songbird is a fantastic Crosby, Stills, and Nash pastiche with some of the band members in there to boot. The Wide-Eyed and Laughing is so fucking cool. It's one of the most interesting kind of musical instrumentation choices that he ever did. And then Idol, another pick for one of my most underrated Elton tracks. Very interesting that song talks about kind of the death of an idol, the death of somebody who is, of a celebrity, I suppose, because in a way, Elton is going to experience some of those trials himself very soon after that. And of course, this came out just a year before the death of Elvis Presley, who to me seems very much like an influence on that song. A Single Man from 78. This to me is where Elton just drops into makes a plain boring record. I've never liked this one very much. It has its moments. But I don't care for Big Dipper. It Ain't Gonna Be Easy is very long and kind of aimless. And Madness to me is kind of disco gone wrong a little bit. Really irritating vocal melody on that one, in my opinion. Again, there's the gatefold here, which I suppose is kind of cool. But yeah, A Single Man is pretty anonymous, and we're getting into an era of Elton's career where there are probably going to be more misses than hits. But that's okay, because he never misses as badly as he does here. Victim of Love, I'm just going to say, is one of the worst albums, one of the worst attempts at making an album that I can think of out of an artist as major as Elton John was. It is a disco record that totally misses the mark in every way. It is fantastic to kind of skip through the first few seconds of each song and realize that every single song, at least after the opener, uses the same drum pattern at exactly the same tempo, exact same BPM. It's hilarious. Yeah, it's a bad album. It's a bad album. It really is. This is an example of me buying a duplicate of a record by accident. That happens from time to time. I have a couple of Elton duplicates that are kind of accidental here. The Tom Bell Sessions. I think the Tom Bell Sessions, this is an EP that came out in 79. They later released, I'm going off of memory here. I think they released the complete Tom Bell Sessions 10 years later, which contains like a few more tracks to make it a proper LP. Tom Bell, rest in peace, the master of Philly soul. And this is good. This is good. I think people view it as kind of a, here's the other copy of it, by the way. I think people view the Tom Bell Sessions as this sort of lost gem of Elton's, and I would not say that at all. I think this is good. It's a major step up from the albums kind of immediately surrounding it. But it doesn't compare, I think, even to his best stuff of the 80s. I think his best 80s albums are a fair bit better than that. This is just, decent, pretty good attempts at Philly soul. 21 to 33. I have almost nothing to say about this record. It's probably one of my least favorites of Elton's when push comes to shove, because there's hardly any songs that I have any desire to go back to on here. Probably the best one by default is Little Genie, which was the hit off of it. But that one, again, if you're looking for recommendations out of here, there's a lot that I have to recommend, obviously, especially in the first half of the 1970s, but you do not need to bother with this one. I do not think it will improve your life in any way. I will, however, recommend this one, The Fox, possibly Elton John's most underrated album. I feel like everybody who gives this record a decent chance, maybe not right away, but on like second or third listen, realizes, hey, this is actually not a bad album. Breaking Down Barriers is a great opener with some really fantastic piano playing. And the entire second side, I think, is incredibly strong. The medley, Carla Etude, into Fanfare, into the song Chloe is terrific. I really like Heels of the Wind. It's a pretty lively piano song. And then the closer, the title track, is really great. But Elton's song, to me, is the peak here. Tom Robinson on lyrics. Very kind of homosexual theme, I suppose you could say, about kind of unrequited love. And, even though this is by no means like a personal representation of Elton's own story, I think it is interesting to kind of capture that in lyrical form. And the song is really beautiful, too. Jump Up is another album where I have two copies for some reason. There's the first, awful fucking cover. And here's the second. This is one of his most wide-ranging records in terms of quality. He has songs like I Am Your Robot on here, which are god-awful. But then he has songs like Empty Garden, Hey Hey Johnny, which is one of the best songs he ever wrote. The John Lennon tribute song, of course. Absolutely fantastic. I think the good outweighs the bad, for sure. But you do have to... You do have to step lightly. Nothing on here is as bad as I Am Your Robot. I mean, that's clearly a joke track that just goes completely wrong. But there is a decent bit of mediocrity. The closer is pretty long and gets kind of under your skin. But Blue Eyes is great. I really like Princess. Ball and Chain is pretty cool. Too Low for Zero. This record is kind of heralded as Elton John's comeback, presumably because it has I'm Still Standing, and I guess that's why they call it The Blues, which were two of his most successful singles in quite a while. I don't know. I would not say this is a great album. I think this is pretty damn good, but Um, I don't think it's quite the standout. I mean, it's probably like my third favorite '80s album of his, and some people think it's like his best by a country mile. Um, to me, I do really like those songs, but I'm actually really partial to the last two tracks on the album, Saint and One More Arrow, which I think are really, really great ballads with these fantastic melodies. Um, but yeah, I don't know. Too Low for Zero is quite good, but I actually don't think there's a huge difference in quality between this and the follow-up record, Breaking Hearts, which I also have two copies of. I'm pretty sure that's because I got this. I'm pretty sure was because I got like two of these in a collection or something, and I genuinely don't know if I forgot that I had these or no. I think I bought these two. I bought copies of them, and then I got duplicates in a collection that I got later. And I think I just never sold the duplicates. But in any case, Breaking Hearts. It is a good Elton John album. It is perfectly fine. Apart from Passengers, which I think is miserable. But otherwise, it's a bunch of perfectly adequate, quite good Elton John songs. In Neon and Burning Buildings on the second side, I think are solid ballads. And then the closing track, Sad Songs, is strong as well. Again, though, it's a little bit anonymous, but we're grateful for that based off of what is to come. Actually, I have this random collection here. Hit selections from Elton John. This is an LP that contains... Actually, no, this is a 12-inch, I think. 33 and a third RPM, promotional copy, not for sale. I've never listened to this, obviously. Which contains hits from his most recent albums on Geffen Records. Sad Songs Say So Much, the single edit. Also contains Blue Eyes. I guess that's why they call it the Blues. And Nobody Wins from the Fox. A very interesting little kind of curio that I picked up at... where was this? I think this was the record store in Mound, Minnesota. The name of which escapes me. The only thing I remember about it is that it is a... I've been there several times, I don't know why. Tonka Tunes, that's what it is. Tonka Tunes, because it's on Lake Minnetonka, in the western suburbs of Minneapolis. And I just remember it because Tonka Tunes is a combination record store and vacuum shop that sells vacuum cleaners, or at least it used to. Really, genuinely pretty stunning like collection of records, especially used stuff. But admit it, it was a very funny place, is all I'm gonna say. But I believe that's where I got that fine. Another promotional copy. This is Ice on Fire from '85. This is not very good. It really isn't. It sounds terrible. Gus Dudgeon, I haven't talked about the producers much. Gus Dudgeon, who produced all of the classic stuff, comes back for this one and doesn't have a clue what to do with Elton John in the '80s. There are some good songs that are struggling to get out here, like Cry to Heaven. Nikita, I think, is good. But too much of it is just buried in this terrible sounds. I have a sort of guilty pleasure affection for Wrap Her Up, as misogynistic as it is. It's also kind of bizarre because it's two gay or bisexual men who are singing like that. I don't know. It's kind of a bop, but it is probably the cringiest bop you will ever hear, or one of the cringiest bops. So I don't know if I could say I enjoy it in good faith or while feeling good about myself. But I guess I just did. So there you go. Leather Jackets. Elton's second or third worst record, depending on the day. I think Victim of Love is worse, and I think one other record potentially is worse. A lot of the same problems as Ice on Fire, but with worse songs. And even more annoying sounds. Don't Trust That Woman is terrible. Heartache All Over the World is miserable. Go It Alone, I kind of ironically love because of that terrible bass line that is so loud that it just imprints itself into your brain. It's kind of remarkable, honestly. But yeah, Leather Jacket's not very good. Red Strikes Back. kind of, again, people call this kind of the comeback record because I don't have a copy of it, but his Live in Australia record, in fact, there's a couple of live albums that I don't have copies of, including Here and There, which you can find pretty much anywhere. So I should get on that. This is also a promotional copy, by the way. Probably can't really make it out below the barcode there. But Red Strikes Back is kind of considered a comeback record because this was after his vocal surgery in either 87 or 88, where it wasn't like it was 87. People weren't sure if he was going to like sing again. He was kind of worried he wasn't going to be able to sing again. And then he did. And his voice really didn't change that much, at least at that point. But again, I don't think this is a great collection of songs. It has its moments. I kind of like Mona Lisa's and Mad Hatters Part 2. It's the total opposite of the original Mona Lisa's and Mad Hatters, but in a good way. But yeah, I don't know. Everything else is just kind of okay. Fine. Nothing that's absolutely horrible, I don't think. Except for that album cover. I mean, what the hell, man? I get he has a lot of outfits, but putting them all together like that doesn't do him a disservice or them doesn't do him service and doesn't do the outfit service, is what I meant to say before I got tongue-tied. Okay, so my program froze on me very briefly, which is very annoying. So we're going to pick right back up with where we left off. We're talking about Elton John Sleeping with the Past. This record, Chris Thomas produces this album, and Chris Thomas's production of Elton John records, very kind of complex relationship with them. Let's just say that a lot of people don't like him as a producer, especially kind of the further we get into this career. And the production is what people hate about this record, and I understand that. I understand why. But damn, man, I think this is a strong bit of songs, very similar to Billy Joel's An Innocent Man, but better, in my personal opinion. And that's actually saying something, because An Innocent Man I rate very highly, as we talked about in the last video. This copy even has recommendations of what the choice songs are, which I do not necessarily disagree with, except that I think almost every song here is pretty damn good. Yeah, it contains Elton's first number one hit in the UK, Sacrifice, which is kind of a mind-blowing thing to think about. Yeah, Sleeping with the Past, fantastic album. No, that's saying a lot, but it's a great album. And this is the period of Elton's career where I have a lot of nostalgia for, just because I listened to these songs a lot, like in college, for whatever reason. I was very drawn to 90s and 2000s Elton. And you see this come out with The One from 1992. Now, this is where we get into rare Elton John records. Everything else here you can find very easily at a used record store or online. But now we get into the 90s, and vinyl records are becoming harder to purchase. So, this issue has been rectified to some extent by Elton, because he has re-released damn near every 90s, 2000s, and 2010s record on vinyl at some point. You can buy them all from his store now. But when I was first collecting Elton records in 2016, 2017, way back when, you did not have these options available. There were several Elton records that were not available on vinyl at all, which made me cry a little bit inside. This was one record that was printed, but it was only printed in certain European countries. Was never pressed in the US, I don't believe. So I did have to order this internationally. I want to say this cost me about $30, whereas most of these other Elton records probably cost me like $10, $12 at most. And this is also a single record, which is very interesting because the reissue is a double album, has 2 records inside of it. Most people hate this album. Most people rate this near the bottom. I have this in the top 10 for whatever reason. I think that's purely driven out of nostalgia, but I also just really appreciate the kind of darker vibe he's going for here. These are not happy songs. He's fresh out of rehab. He's kind of not sure of his place in the world. He's had a lot of like bad things happen to him recently. And you feel that come out in his songs here. And I think it works. I really do. So yeah, The One, strong album. If you want you probably want standout songs from both of the last two records. I suppose Sleeping with the Past, I'd probably say I really like the opener, Durban Deep. I really like Stone's Throw from Hurtin'. Obviously, Healing Hands is fantastic. From the one, I like almost every song equally, but I want to give special mention to The North and On Dark Street. I think On Dark Street is this really great, like, bit of soul, straight from Sleeping with the Past, essentially. It's very similar stylistically, but I think it works really well, better than a lot of the songs on Sleeping with the Past, if I may be so bold. Made in England. You seen the ringware on this record. So Elton apparently just reissued this on vinyl, like not that long ago. I don't remember specifically when, but I just remember going into a record store and seeing it on vinyl there for the first time. But as you can tell by the ringware, this is not an original. Can't focus for shit. This is not a reissue. This is an original. This is one of the rarest records that I have in my collection because I believe this was only pressed in 2 countries, one of which was Greece, and I believe Greece is where I got it from. I could be completely wrong about the countries, but I know with damn near certainty that I got it from Greece. Again, it's a single record, unlike the reissue, which is a double album, and again, kind of worn to shit, but I still ended up paying something like 70 something bucks for it. Which I think is including shipping, but it might not have been. But I had to, because Made in England for a long time was one of my favorite Elton John records, and still would rank pretty close to the top 5 for me. I think as far as late career records go, he sounds very content here, which he doesn't on the one. And these songs, like across the board, are strong. It's adult contemporary. I mean, Elton is sliding pretty thoroughly into adult contemporary territory at this point. But if you're not upset by that, and for the most part, I don't think people should be, I think it is a genre that gets a bit too ragged on, even if it is quote unquote easy, prone to stereotyping, what have you. If you like adult contemporary music, I think that's almost as good as you're going to get, frankly. Really great stuff. Favorite song on that? Probably, I really like House. But Belfast and Latitude, Please, as well. Really good. Hard to go wrong. The next few albums, though, are going to be reissues. And oh my gosh, I buried the lead. You notice I skipped straight from the one to Made in England. Duets is the only proper Elton John record that I don't own on vinyl. This was issued in the 90s. It has not been reissued yet, to my understanding. I believe it's the only Elton John record that still hasn't been. In my opinion, there is a good reason for it, because I think it's maybe his second worst record. So no, I'm not going to go on Discogs and pay $70 fucking for that album, which I think sucks. I'm just going to wait for the reissue whenever that happens, if it ever happens. Again, it's a duets record, so there's clearances that have to go through for a lot of different people. I know at least one of the songs from that record is not, like, you can't stream it on Spotify, at least not in the US, so I'm sure there's quite a bit of frustrating things going on, which is why it hasn't been reissued yet. But again, I'm not really in any rush to get it, so that is the only thing stopping this from being a complete collection of Elton John studio albums. I digress. The Big Picture from 1997. I remember seeing this in a record shop and my jaw kind of dropped because I didn't realize they had reissued it. This came out in 1997. This was never issued on vinyl until the reissue campaign kind of started. I don't remember for sure if Elton hates this record. I know Topin does. This is adult contemporary to the extreme. So Chris Thomas, our friend, again, he produced a lot of the 80s stuff, produced The One, which the production is absolutely the weak point of that record. I will not deny that. Did not produce Made in England, but then came back for this record, and it, boy, does not, like, it's very overblown. It's cleaner sounding than a lot of the 80s records, but these songs are all very massive, way more massive than they need to be. And there are good songs that are screaming to get out of these productions. Some very good songs, in fact. If the River Can Bend and Recover Your Soul, probably my two favorites, because I think those are the two songs that survive the assault of sound the best. Yeah. Songs from the West Coast from 2001. This one also surprised me a little bit when I found it, because I don't think I knew they had reissued it at that point. And in fact, I'm not entirely sure that this was a separate reissue. I kind of feel like, oh no, it probably was. But I know that at this point they had just released a set of like Elton John's, was it Grammy nominated records or something like that. It was a collection of classic Elton John records that also included Too Low for Zero, if memory serves, his like representative 80s record, and it included this one. And you had to buy the whole damn collection in order to get this. But I actually don't, I think this might have been a separate reissue from like 2016 or whatever. But yeah, Songs from the West Coast. It's not my favorite 2000s Elton John record. It really isn't, but it's worth it. It deserves the hype for sure. A lot of just great bits of songwriting. I think the production is strong from Patrick Leonard. And, you know, Elton sounds, you know, he sounds content here. Like he really has settled into kind of the aged pop star vibe and does so superbly. Really does. So quite happy with that record. Highlight on that one for me, probably This Train, Don't Stop There Anymore, American Triangle 2. Peachtree Road. This one I believe I just got last year, along with the next record I'm going to talk about. Elton John goes country, pretty much. He leans into the more kind of country side of the sound on Songs from the West Coast. Self-produced record as well. This album has actually grown on me a lot. It didn't used to be one of my favorite Elton John records, but now it's not top 5, but it's probably top 10 for me. I really like the songwriting on here. I think this is super strong overall. And I think, to me, this is my favorite 2000s Elton album. I think it does edge out Songs from the West Coast for me. Because this, to me, is probably his most morose record, I suppose. There's more reflections on aging in like a not positive way on here. Like he's, you know, all these lyrics about knowing that his time is going to come, that sort of thing. And I really like that kind of reflective side of him. And we don't see that quite as much in the later records, even the ones that are a bit softer, because those, maybe he's playing more like characters and things like that. But Peachtree Road, it sounds sincere. It sounds like it's about him, or Topin writing about himself or what have you. And I don't know. I just think it's a terrific album. And my favorite song on there is probably It's Getting Dark in Here or something, maybe. I don't know. The Captain and the Kid. This record was another one I got just last year. This one, unlike Big Picture, Songs from the West Coast, and Peachtree Road, was not released on vinyl initially. Peachtree Road technically was, but I think on like a promotional only basis. So if you wanted a copy, you needed to pay like $600 for it. Captain and the Kid, kind of a sequel to Captain Fantastic, which is cool. And the songwriting, again, is really strong. I mean, he's 3 for 3 in solid 2000s records, which is more than a lot of legacy artists can say. I think, I don't know. I've kind of lost for words with this one, just because it's a bit more stylistically diverse than Peachtree Road. Peachtree Road is just kind of mellow all the time, and this one, you have the upbeat songs like Just Like Noah's Ark, and the House Fell Down, which, depending on the day, might be my favorite song just because of how kind of insane it is. It's supposed to be kind of an oral representation of using cocaine, which I think is really cool. But yeah, I don't think the highlights are quite as strong here as the other records. And I don't think the floor is quite as high either. It's just kind of a notch below Peachtree Road and Songs from the West Coast for me. And we are coming pretty close to the end now. We have Elton John and Leon Russell, The Union. from 2010. Cool record. I suppose a little bit more interesting in idea than it is in execution. I think Leon Russell's piano playing is still pretty good on here, but his voice is clearly very aged. Yeah, again, the songs here, a little bit, T-Bone Burnett comes in with the production on this one, and it is a little bit oversaturated sometimes, with like female backing singers and that sort of thing. But when it hits pretty damn hard. There's some cool other collaborators, Neil Young on Gone to Shiloh, Brian Wilson on When Love Is Dying. So it's a cool record. Not a great Elton John album. It's not, I don't know if it's top half for me, but pretty solid. All right, we just froze again, which is fan-fucking-tastic. I was transitioning into talking about The Diving Board from 2013. Apologize for the freezing. I'm not sure what's going on. This computer did just restart to update, so apologies for that. But The Diving Board, in any case, it's a great album. One of Elton's most underrated. It's his most piano-focused record, and some people think that's to the album's detriment because the songs sound the same and that sort of thing. That's fine. You can believe that. I'm not going to discredit that opinion. But I think the songwriting is really good. I think these are some of Topin's best lyrics on here. And, yeah, Oceans Away, Oscar Wilde Gets Out, The Ballad of Blind Tom, Boyer. A lot of great stuff on here, in my opinion. Very bland album cover, though. I will say that. Wonderful Crazy Night from 2016. You can see I got it as a clearance record right here. I did not want to pay full price for this record because to me this is not bad, but it's certainly one of Elton's most anonymous releases. I don't have a whole lot of great things to say about it. Most of these songs I've not really, I don't know, haven't really stuck out to me. And, you know, Blue Wonderful is pretty good, I suppose. Tambourine is interesting. But no, I've never been a big fan of this one. And again, cover is god awful. Just like really uncomfortable to look at. But it's nice. It's an upbeat Elton record, so I suppose there's that. 2021's The Lockdown Sessions. You will see some mixed opinions on this one. And by mixed opinions, I mean there are some people who think this is okay, and some people who think this is one of the worst things ever released. I tend to be in the former category. I don't mind these collaborations, at least not all of them, but there are definitely some production choices on here that are questionable to say the least. Like, Elton's voice sounds terrible in After All, among other things. I just, God. There's some really awful production choices on here, specifically with Elton's voice. But you get some solid highlights too here. I like the Young Thug Nicki Minaj collab. I think it's pretty damn solid stuff. And the Pink Phantom to me is like the best thing Elton has done in the last decade. Like since The Diving Board, Elton has not done anything better than the Pink Phantom. I think that's a fantastic Gorillaz song, obviously, but I think Elton adds to that in a very interesting and creative way, along with Black, the rapper featured as well. And then we end by going back to the beginning. Regimental Sergeant Zippo. This came out in 2021, as well. And I think actually this has come before Lockdown Sessions chronologically. I think it might, but whatever. Regimental Sergeant Zippo was the kind of unfinished album that, mostly finished record, I think, if not completely, that was never officially released on a record label. And frankly, after listening to it, it's not entirely difficult to see why. It is very, reminds me of the album Bee Gees First in quite a few ways. Just not as good. I don't think that's necessarily a compliment. Bee Gees First is a great album, but I think this sounds like imitation of that a lot of the time. Because, I don't know, average sounding psychedelia to me doesn't do a whole lot for me. Like, I'm not fascinated by a record just because it has psychedelic pop or rock influences. There's good songs for sure. I like A Dandelion Dies in the Wind. But yeah, this is not something that I was super crazy about when I first heard it finally, because I put off listening to it for quite a while. So yeah, not a huge recommendation and not a great note to end on, but we have come to the conclusion of my Elton John collection. So thank you to everyone who sat through the whole thing, computer freezes and all. And until next time, we'll be talking about records that aren't Elton John, which I'm sure some people will be more than grateful for. But until then, thank you for bearing with this very long episode. I hope you have a great day. Thanks for subscribing to the Music Deep Dive, and I will see you next time.